Welcome to today's webinar on one very seen problem that shows up in almost every compliance program. Security teams implement controls. Compliance teams report on controls. But the problem is that the two groups are often working from completely different views of the environment. A common example is access control. A compliance requirement might say that privileged access must be limited, reviewed regularly, and documented. From the compliance perspective, this usually turns into a policy, a checklist, and evidence for an audit. But from the security team's perspective, access control lives inside identity platforms, directory services, and permission structures across dozens of systems. What often happens is that the compliance team asks a simple question: who has privileged access and how often is it reviewed? The security team then has to pull data from multiple systems, interpret it, and explain what those permissions actually mean. Even something that looks simple on paper can take hours or days to verify. Without a shared process between these teams, organizations often rely on screenshots, spreadsheets, or manual exports to demonstrate that a control exists. That evidence may satisfy an audit, but it does not always reflect the full picture of how access actually works across the environment. A more effective approach is to map each compliance requirement directly to the system that generates the evidence for that control. Instead of asking security teams to manually gather proof, the organization identifies where the data lives and how it can be collected consistently. The next step is defining how that evidence is evaluated. Compliance frameworks usually describe outcomes rather than technical methods. They say access should be limited or monitored, but they do not specify how the environment should implement that requirement. This is where security teams translate the language of the framework into concrete operational rules. Those rules might include automatic reports of privileged accounts, alerts when administrative permissions are assigned, or scheduled access review workflows that require managers to validate permissions. Once those processes are defined, the compliance requirement becomes something that is continuously verified rather than something that is assembled manually before an audit. This is where platforms like Centraleyes start to become useful. Instead of compliance teams requesting evidence manually and security teams exporting data from multiple systems, Centraleyes connects those sources and maps them directly to the frameworks the organization is working with. Access control, vulnerability management, encryption policies, and other technical safeguards can be linked to the specific compliance requirements they support.